Welcome to Now It's History. I'm Richard Gallant, your host, and Now It's History for many of our regular listeners. As you know, it's almost always about nonfiction, but we do make exceptions for fiction that is so well researched that it reads like real life. And the new novel by Steve Holmes, who's my guest today, certainly fits that description. Steve has had a remarkable journalism career at the Washington Post, Time Magazine, CNN, and the New York Times, where he was a member of the Pulitzer Prize-winning team that produced Race in America. Steve and I worked together at CNN for nearly a decade, and I'm really delighted that he's joined us today. Welcome to Now It's History, Steve.
Thanks, Rich. Thanks for having me.
And congrats on Black Messiahs. This is the book. It's came out in May, and it's a terrific read. It literally is one that I couldn't put down. And I want to start by asking Steve about the challenges of moving from a fact-based medium, journalism, to fiction, to writing a novel. What were the challenges and how did you overcome them?
Well, it was a little bit difficult at first. I look, for 45 years, I had to, in journalism, I had to make sure that every word I wrote, every word I edited, every word I was associated with was true, was accurate, could stand up to scrutiny. And coming over to fiction was a challenge because, I couldn't get out of my head sometimes when I would write something that, this isn't really true. This is just something comes out of my imagination. But after a while, which I have to tell you, it got really liberating to sort of realize that after 45 years of making sure that every word was accurate and true and could stand up to scrutiny, it was truly liberating to basically have the liberty to just make shit up.
And how did you, given that liberating power that you gave yourself here, how did you sort of reality test whether what your imagination came up with would seem plausible to the reader?
Well, what I did in writing the book, almost every chapter or every anecdote or every scene that I wrote, I told myself it had to have what I call the spine of truth to it. In other words, there was just something, it was based around something that was actually true. And once I determined that something was actually true, then I felt the liberty to just add things to this spine of truth. I added what I would call tendons and muscles and blood vessels to make this body come alive. And I'll give you an example if you bear with me for a second. I have a minor character, a man by the name of William Hasty. And William Hasty was a black man, and he was the highest black man in the War Department during World War II. And he was tasked with making sure, looking out for the lives and the experiences of black soldiers in this segregated army. And he was having a very frustrating time because Hasty was an integrationist, and he was fighting to have the army set up mixed race units, and he was getting nowhere. And he was really frustrated about that. He was also frustrated by the treatment of black soldiers, many of whom were based on bases in the South. So one day he gets this envelope, and inside this envelope is a newspaper clipping from the Chicago Daily Defender. And the clipping talks about the arrival of some black lieutenants at a black tank battalion training in Louisiana. This was very unusual because most black units during World War II, all the officers were white. And here was a few black officers at this unit. And accompany this clip, this newspaper clip, was a note, a handwritten note that said, "One small step," and was signed T. Marshall. And so Hasty leans back as I write it and says to himself, "Ah, that Thurgood, he's really smart. He's really thoughtful. He's going to go far." Well, here's the truth. There was a man named William Hasty. He was, a high official in the War Department and looking out for the benefit of black soldiers. He was very frustrated in his job. And before he got that job, he taught at and then was later the dean of the Howard University Law School. And one of his students was Thurgood Marshall. So the relationship between Hasty and Marshall is true. The fact that he was in the War Department is true. The fact that he was frustrated in his job is true. Everything else about that anecdote I made up.
A great example. Let's take a step back and just clue in the readers or clue in the listeners and viewers of this podcast. What is the book about?
Good. I'm glad it's a World War II novel that basically interweaves the stories of the experiences of mainly two black soldiers who are serving in the segregated army, and it interweaves their story with the struggles of a young Jewish boy from Eastern Poland who's desperately trying to survive the Holocaust. And this young boy who is caught up in the Holocaust and interned in a series of concentration camps, including Auschwitz, is sustained in his struggle by a fervent belief that one day he's going to be rescued by American soldiers. But he doesn't know, and there's no way he could know, that his eventual saviors are black soldiers who have been prevented for years by American racism from fighting his Nazi oppressors. That, in a nutshell, is the book.
The one word that I thought of after reading Black Messiahs was empathy, because I found that you really remarkably got inside the heads of people from so many different backgrounds and showed their essential humanity, but also the way they thought, the way they viewed the world, it rings true. And I'm just curious about, how hard is it to do that?
Well, I have to say, Rich, one of the things I am most proud of in this book is that the characters really are people that I am not. Right? It's about soldiers, and I've never served in the military. A number of my minor characters, but very important characters, are women. I'm obviously a man. Obviously, the main tent poles of this book is Jewish communities and Jewish culture. And I'm not Jewish. And I even have a very important minor character who is a gay black soldier, and I'm not gay. So I think what I was able to do, or I was able to lean on to support me, was my experience as a journalist, and my experience as a reporter. I mean, reporters oftentimes, and especially in my career, had to try and get into the heads and really understand and really be empathetic to the people you're writing about. And I think that experience really served me well. And in doing this, I would ask myself when I wrote this character, a particular character, what would a Jewish man in this given moment think? And I had obviously, throughout my career, talked with, interviewed, was friendly with a number of people who are Jewish. So I had some sense of what they might think. And And I think I just brought that to that particular sense of empathy to my characters. At least I hope I did.
I think you succeeded there. Um, Wanted to talk about some of the characters who stand out in the book and maybe get your take on what made them tick. So obviously the brothers, Sammy and Amos.
Right. Well, it's funny. You should bring that up. Those two characters came from my research. In this sense, I originally wanted to this book to be focused on a particular unit, military unit that served in World War II, a black tank battalion, the 761st Tank Battalion, who had a very interesting story. And I was doing research. I ran across another black military unit that was a field artillery battalion that had a very compelling story. Um, and I said, myself, I want to include their story as well. How am I going to do that? And the way I decided to do that is I'll have two of my main characters be brothers, and one could be in one military unit, the tank battalion, and the other could be in the artillery battalion. But once I made that decision, then what led from that is that you have brothers. You can talk about things like sibling rivalry and competition for your parents' affection and favoritism amongst the parents, so for one child over the other. And in doing that, I sort of leaned on my own experiences in my family. I have an older brother, and we were very competitive when we were young in sports and in academics, and for our parents' affection. And uh, I sort of, leaned into my recollections of my brother and myself and how we interacted and how our parents interacted with us, and so that helped me shape those characters.
Did you talk to your brother about it?
I did, I did. In fact, it's funny because you know, in the book, the older brother is a sort of a straight arrow who adheres to the rules and the career paths that his parents laid out. Right? Well, the younger brother is a bit of a rebel who yearns for adventure. Well, the fact of the matter is that when we were after we graduated high school, my older brother Gil did follow a very straight and narrow path. He, went to undergrad, he went to law school, and he set up his own law practice. Me, on the other hand, I dropped out of college after my freshman year, and then I really just, had this kind of weird and wonderful experience. I bummed around Europe for several months. I moved to San Francisco, became a hippie. Literally, was a hippie. Lived in a commune, ingested all sorts of chemical substances, both organic and inorganic. And it was then came back to New York and just started driving a taxi cab, and did that while I went back to school. So when I was writing it, I called my brother to talk to him about it. And the first conversation, I said to him, Gil, listen, I got these two characters who are brothers. The older brother is a real straight arrow, does just basically follows the path that his parents laid out for him. And the younger brother is a bit of a rebel. And my brother starts laughing and he says, gee, I wonder where you got that from.
Okay. And you've already referred to your other primary character, David,
Mhm.
who's the young boy who endures the Holocaust. Can you talk a little bit about the role he
Well,
plays?
David is actually based on a real person, um, and who actually was um, the inspiration for the book. And let me tell you how that came about. I decided I was going to write a novel. I had never written any fiction before, and so I was trying to figure out what the framework was going to be, what the plot was going to be, who the characters were. And then back in November of 2020, then President-elect Joe Biden named Anthony Blinken as his Secretary of State. And I was watching on TV, I was watching the press conference for Blinken's nomination. And Blinken got up and told the story of his stepfather, a man by the name of Samuel Pizer, who was a young Jewish boy who in Eastern Poland got caught up in the Holocaust and was interned in a number of concentration camps and was finally rescued at the end of the war, near death, by a black tank battalion. And I'm watching this and I said, that's it. That's what I'm going to base my novel on. I'm going to basically talk about this moment when these two characters come together, and the novel will basically sketch out the stories of how each one of these characters reached that moment. And so that's how I got the David character. But I didn't. It's my story. My novel is not a retelling of the Pizer story. It's just as inspired by that moment. But I talk about in the Jewish characters is all stuff that I got from other research or from my imagination.
And then there's Donna, one of
Hmm.
the women, one of the main women in the story.
Yeah, Donna is in some ways based on my mother. Um, in some ways, Donna is a very strong, very independent character who was an athlete in college. I'm sorry, in high school, and ran track, and was a bit of what was known as a tomboy after she graduated, and people thought she would never get married. Well, my mother was kind of athletic, ran track in high school, was a bit of a tomboy, and when she married my father, people were shocked. They thought that my mother would never get married. So, sort of some of the traits that I describe in Donna are based on those of my mother. But because I wanted one of my male characters to have a love interest because I wanted some romance in this book. But I didn't want the um uh the love interest, the girlfriend, to just be some meek, um stand by your man kind of character, because I don't see that I never saw that in most, if not all, of the black women I've known all my
Hmm.
life.
Hmm.
And so I wanted her to be really strong, really independent, opinionated, um, uh, and yet vulnerable at the same time. And the vulnerability comes out as well.
And then there's Hava.
Hava is, again, kind of based on a real person. She is a Jewish um, leader, one of the two leaders of an armed rebellion in this city in Eastern Poland, amongst the Jews in the city in Eastern Poland. And there really was a woman. Her name, I'm going to mispronounce it. It was sort of like Chalka, and it's spelled Chajka Grossman. All right. And she and another person, another man by the name of Mordecai Tannenbaum, led this armed rebellion. Well, I took that woman's character. I changed the name because I thought American audience wouldn't. It wouldn't. The spelling of the first name wouldn't ring very well to American ears. So I changed it to Hava, and I purposely changed it to Hava because of the Yiddish, because that's the Yiddish translation of a particular word, which I won't say now because it's kind of important in the book. Um, anyhow, so uh, as I said, she was the co-leader of this resistance group. Now, in the book, I made her and Tannenbaum uh, lovers. In real life, they were not.
So much of the book, as you alluded to, has its roots in reality, and Jackie Robinson is a character in the book, and it is really striking scenes of black soldiers in the American South when they're training, I guess, getting ready to go to Europe, enduring really vicious treatment,
Hmm.
and potentially life-threatening situations. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, this is again based on fact. I
Yeah.
mean, it was a fact that black soldiers. The U.S. had a lot of its main army bases were located in the South, um, for mainly for reasons of weather. They could train year round. They didn't have to worry about cold and snow. But that meant that these black soldiers were in places like North Carolina, of Georgia, Louisiana, and they had to endure this really vicious segregation, um, both on and off the base. Um, there was, some things that, for example, things that would happen on the base, and this is something I did not put in the book, but one of the things that happened is that when the army brought in USO shows to entertain the troops, the black soldiers were not allowed to attend these USO shows, mainly because the army didn't want to. A lot of these shows had sort of like scantily clad dancers, female dancers, and the army didn't want black soldiers ogling white women. So the black soldiers weren't allowed to attend these USO shows, but white German prisoners of war were allowed to. And so that, it's the South in the 1940s for a black person was a very dangerous place. And here you had these black troops. So a lot of them, not the majority, but a lot of them from the North who hadn't had endured this sort of rigid segregation and rigid and dangerous situations were now in the South, and they had a hard time dealing with it.
And you talk about was it the Green Book?
The Green Book. Well, the Green Book was very well known um, uh, reference item amongst black people, mainly. Well, it was used a lot from by black people in the North who came to the South. And the Green Book was essentially places where black people could eat, or black people could, hotels where they could stay in the South because for the most part, um, if you were traveling in the South because of segregation, you wouldn't be able to eat at most restaurants. You wouldn't be able to book a room at almost all of the hotels. But there were a few that would. Many of them were black owned, and a few were white, not many. And they were listed in the Green Book, and that's how you found out if you were traveling to, say, Montgomery, Alabama, or Jackson, Mississippi, or in the case in the book that I mentioned, Tulsa, Oklahoma. You could find a place to stay if you looked in the Green Book.
Switching over to the European side, I thought your treatment of the ethical quandaries around collaboration between the leaders of the ghetto and the Nazi regimes was very nuanced and very interesting.
Well, one of the interesting characters I had was a man by the name of Ephraim Baraz. And again, based on a real person, he actually existed. And Baraz basically was placed in charge of an organization called the Judenrat, which was the Jewish council in the ghetto of the city, Bialystok, Poland. And the Judenrat was charged with sort of making life better for the Jews. Now, in most places, and these sort of organizations existed in many of the Jewish ghettos that the Nazis set up during the World War II, and mostly all they did was basically prepare the people, or in some ways and sometimes uh, in that preparation, those kept them ignorant of what their fate might be, but so they were prepared to be shipped out to be exterminated. In Bialystok, what happened was the Judenrat set up manufacturing plants because Bialystok, the city that this ghetto was in, had been a manufacturing center mainly for clothing. And so what was set up in the ghetto were these manufacturing plants that made uniforms and boots and things like that for the Nazi troops. And they were very important for the Nazis because a lot of their manufacturing centers in Germany were put out of action by the Allied bombing campaign. And so Baraz's view was a way to keep these Jews in the Bialystok ghetto alive was to make them indispensable, irreplaceable, and important to the Germans by manufacturing things that the Germans need. And so he had to walk this line because there were a number of the Nazis who were very happy to have this happen, and then there were a number of the Nazis, especially in the higher ups, people like Heydrich and Himmler, who didn't care. All they wanted to do was exterminate the Jews. And so he had to walk this line of being productive in order to save his people. And being productive, which meant that he had to, in a sense, collaborate with the Germans.
A really significant um, aspect of the whole situation.
Hmm.
You also deal with the sort of heartbreaking fate of soldiers, American soldiers in the Ardennes forest um, toward the tail end of the war, when it just looks like um, the Allies are about to win the war, and yet there are these really shocking developments that go the other way, including the torture and killing of American soldiers.
Right. Well, and this is one of the reasons why I wanted to uh, include the story of the 333rd Field Artillery Battalion, which is the battalion which the older brother Amos joins. What happened towards the uh, at some point, actually, it was in late 1944, when the Allies thought that the German army was basically defeated. Hitler ordered and the Germans pulled off a very surprise attack in the Ardennes forest that resulted in what was later known as the Battle of the Bulge. And it was a surprise attack, and in the early stages, it sent American and British troops into full-fledged retreat, panicked retreat. And the 333rd Field Artillery Battalion stayed in place while American and British forces were retreating all around them, and kept up an artillery barrage that slowed the German advance and allowed more of the American soldiers, white American soldiers, by the way, to escape. As a result of that, a number of them were captured. A number of the members of the Field Artillery Battalion was captured, and they ended up in a small town in eastern Belgium called Velet. And, the Germans took them to essentially a field and tortured them and killed them. And one of the most moving moments I had when I was um, researching the book is I found this little tiny memorial in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of a cow pasture or by a cow pasture in eastern Belgium, to the members of this artillery battalion who were killed. And for the longest time, that memorial was the only memorial on the European continent dedicated to the black soldiers who fought to relieve Europe of the scourge of Nazism.
Where else did you travel?
Well, I traveled mainly France, Belgium, and Poland. Um, Poland was an interesting travel. Because that's where the main concentration camps were, the ones that really, um, really sort of took the lead in the extermination of Jews. Poland, if you could remember, before the war, Poland was the center of European Jewry, and in fact, it had the largest concentration of Jews in their population than any country in the world before World War II. 90% of them were killed by the Nazis. All right. And in such killing factories as Treblinka, which is a site that I visited. Treblinka was a slaughterhouse. Um, it was in operation for not quite a year, and in that time killed nearly 1 million people. And it is after the war, well, as the Russian army was approaching, the Germans raised it and plowed it under and buried and planted a pine forest there. And when I visited the site 80 years after its closure, um, this pine forest had grown to full maturity. And at the moment I visited, the wind was blowing through the boughs of these pine trees, and as it did, you could almost in the wind, you could almost hear the whispers of all the dead who had been killed
Mm.
there.
You get into sort of the heart of the evil of um, hatred
Mhm.
and racism and anti-Semitism, um, you know, on both sides of the war. Um, did you come away with any thoughts about that phenomenon? And is it just something in human nature that's ineradicable, or does anything give you hope that we can get beyond that?
Well, that's a really good question. You know, the what was happening to the Jews under Hitler's murderous regime, and what was going on amongst black people in the United States. I don't want to say it was the same or it was equivalent. There were differences, and people can argue whether which one was worse. I think it's a kind of a useless debate to do that. But you do have to understand how much this hate was related. Um, the what I mean by that, how much uh, uh, at its base was this sort of idea that uh, a group of people just didn't deserve to be not only on equal status with you, but in some cases, they didn't deserve to be alive. Right? Um, and the fact of the matter is that's really truly based on hate and bigotry. And but I don't feel that it is inherent. I think things can change. I mean, look at Germany now. Um, y- I did visit Berlin when I was there, and Berlin's a thriving, wonderful city, and that basically sort of tries to own up to the Germans passed. Um, so there's hope there. And you look at the United States now. We still have a long, long way to go, and in some ways, we're sort of regressing at the moment. But let's remember that you know um, years after black people in the South um, couldn't have a drink of water and from the same water fountain as white people, or had to ride on in the back of buses, or sit in different parts of the movie theater, or couldn't run for office, or if you spoke up, you were lynched. This is the same country that elected a black man president twice. Now, is racism gone? No, but you can't help but having some hope of uh, of the sense of progress.
The history here, obviously is, 80 years old, but these issues and the entire context feel very much of today, uh, where racism and anti-Semitism are prevalent in some quarters. And in some ways, I think your book is going to appeal to older readers who, have more of a sense of history and more likely to have, inherited from their families and from their studies what was going on way back then. But
Mhm.
in some ways, I think the most important audience would be young people, people who don't know this history, who really should know it and should see the human consequences as you really lay them out so expertly. Um, have you thought about ways to get younger readers more into this and to, I don't know, have you even thought about a young adult edition of the book or,
I haven't thought about that.
yeah.
I am in discussions with some organizations, specifically the Shoah Foundation, to try and do events aimed at young people to
Mhm.
basically talk about this history and try to make connections to what's going on today.
Mhm.
Um, because it's as as a number of people, including Martin Luther King Jr., said that history isn't a straight line, right? And progress isn't a straight line. Um, it sort of loops around, and it's two steps forward, one step back. Um, and I feel today we're in that one step back phase, and it's important to for and some people get a sense of hopelessness about that. But I think it's important for people, especially young people, who might feel this sort of sense of might be frustrated with what's going on in the country, or with black leaders, or other leaders who aren't, in their view, fighting hard enough, to remind them that it's not something. Progress isn't something that happens, in a step by step. I'm sorry, in a in sort of a lightning fast um, occurrence. I mean, it is a step by step process that sometimes gets stalled, but usually then picks up momentum. Um, uh, there was major advances made as a result of the push that happened in the 1950s. And um, that push was fueled by people who either had direct experience, or remembered the experience, or read about the experience of Black people in defeating um, Nazism. And so I'm an optimist. I think that things will um, improve. Um, it's going to be a fight. Um, and it's going to be there's going to be defeats along the way. Um, but what I want people to take away from this book is how important it is to remember the successes of Black people, of Jewish people during really tough times, and tell themselves if they could succeed during those tough times, we can succeed now.
Well, I think that's an inspiring message, and I'm really glad that you've told it in such a compelling way in our conversation, but especially in Black Messiahs, which I really urge everybody to run out and get a copy and let people know how you feel about it after you've read it.
Thank you, Rich. I really appreciate that, and I can't emphasize that anymore. If you get it, and I should certainly hope you do, and you read it and you like it, tell people. I'm uh, I'm not a big name author. My publishing house is rather small. We don't have a strong marketing punch, and so the only way this book is going to get known is through word of mouth. And so, if you like it, tell your friends. If
And
you
then
don't
maybe
like it, don't tell anybody.
and then maybe we'll see it on Netflix or in a theater.
Hopefully.
Great. Congratulations on the book and best of luck with it, and great to catch up, Steve.
All right. Thank you very much, Rich. You take
Take care.
care.
Bye-bye.